Welcome in, everybody, to SEC Football and Beyond. Joined, as always, by Neil McCready, our good friend, Dan Matthews as well. Hope you're having a great week. And we're excited, again, to partner our relationship with the folks at Podcast Park. And we hope this is reaching more and more of you. Spread the word about what we're doing at SEC Football and Beyond. And remember to search for and like and subscribe to the Landry Football Podcast channel. That's how you find it. Just very simple. The Landry Football Podcast channel on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, wherever you get your podcasts, so you can listen to us here on SEC Football and Beyond. It's going to drop every Tuesday and Friday. We're going to be here live on Twitch, YouTube, Facebook at 5 p.m. on Mondays and Thursdays, so you can join us in the chat room. Neil, Dan, how are you doing?
Gentlemen, I'm good. It's been a full day here in pretty steamy Oxford, Mississippi. Getting ready to head to SEC Media Days later, I guess Sunday. So kind of excited to get to that place, actually, as a matter of fact. It's kind of, we talked about this a little bit after not having it last year and all of that. It's kind of cool to have it this year and to know that, it's going to be one of those events that normally you sort of take for granted that I'm not sure this time I will.
Yeah.
Dan, where are you heading, Dan?
Yeah, so next week I will be in Charlotte for ACC kickoff, because it's such a fancy event there. They don't call it just media days in the ACC. It's a kickoff. And for those of you that don't know about their two-day event, which, of course, people can say it's coincidental or it's not coincidental. They definitely want to be able to cut into what's happening in Hoover. I think anybody can guess into that. But, no, it's going to be a good one. They break it up in the conferences, or divisions, So you'll have the Coastal one day. So that's Georgia Tech and that crew there. And then the next day you're going to have the Atlantic. So it's going to be Dabo and that side of the ACC. So we'll have that coming. And, by the way, it's nice to actually be able to have my face up here with you guys.
Yes.
Not just a photo.
Add a little class to the joint, will you? There you go.
I saw that in the comments last time. Who the hell is this guy? Well, now you know who I am.
Yeah, you see, people don't know. He joined us, and he 88 out the gate. He was just down the hall. He was working on his putting game, everything, and chipping in the hall. That's all he was doing. But now I said, hey, look, get your face on here.
Yeah, now you're kind of like the Wizard of Oz. We're back behind the curtain. People can't know that, man.
Well, if you joined us, hopefully you joined us earlier in the week in the Tuesday morning show, the live Monday show. We broke down Arkansas and Vanderbilt. Today, we're going to get into Mississippi State, South Carolina. We're going to work our way up. And, of course, join us in the chat room. Send us your questions, comments. Dan will get to them. We'll get to them in the mailbag segment towards the end of the show. We'll get to them. So no fears on that. But as we like to say, what's happening in SEC football, let's get to that a little bit. Some news you need to know about. Auburn getting a 3-star commitment. Gerald Stinson, it's an Auburn 3-star commitment that he has that's reopened his recruitment. He's a good-looking kid at 5'10", 160 out of Opelika. But I think they've kind of backed off of him a little bit. He also as well. UCF, Florida, Ole Miss, Penn State. He's a good-looking kid that's got to fill out. But he was an early commitment that I think is a little bit trending, but he's reopened his commitment. One of the reasons why we want you to listen to this show is we told you on Tuesday that it was trending, that Vanderbilt was likely going to get a commitment from a former Notre Dame commitment. He has done so. That's happened since we last visited with you. Darren Agu, the big 6'6", 230-pounder, that's got a large frame as it would suggest. Obviously, been recruited, very familiar. Clark Lee with him. He has made it official as you can make it with a verbal commitment. Some good news, Neil and guys, on Tennessee. They get a really good commitment since we last spoke. Cameron Miller, the wide receiver, 4-star from Memphis, 6'1", 195, can really run. Alabama, Auburn, Florida, Michigan, Oregon. He only took one visit. He really liked Tennessee from early on, so good news there. Very productive player. He's the 11th player they've got committed for the 2022 cycle. And some other news, they've got a 4-star offensive lineman, Addison Nichols, that has trimmed his list down to Ohio State, North Carolina, and Tennessee, and the Vols are in pretty good shape there. Elsewhere, Malachi Nelson, the quarterback out of California, 2023 class. There is more than one quarterback. We know who everybody talks about in 2023 class, but this kid's really good in his own right. LSU, USC, Florida State, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Oklahoma, and Alabama is where he's kind of narrowed down his list. And Missouri getting a verbal from three-star defensive lineman Jalen Marshall. They've got double-digit commitments there. He's a good-looking kid that doesn't give you much in terms of a pass rush, but really good-looking player in that kind of Kansas, Indiana, Nebraska, Oklahoma State were the other schools that were interested in him. For more news and notes around the SEC, college football nationally, NFL, draft, recruiting, head on over to LandryFootball.com. So, Neil, some good news, at least positive news for Tennessee, trending that they're starting to get in it a little bit more with some of these kids that they've not been able to have much success with in recent years.
Yeah, recruiting hasn't been the issue. Their issue's been hanging on to people, not losing them into the transfer portal. They've suffered a tremendous amount of losses, and then he's got a weird season coming up where I think Tennessee's going to lose a lot of games, and so he's going to have to sell a different thing to these recruits. It's one thing to get a bunch of early commitments and stuff, and then that season rolls around, and if the L's pile up, sometimes the kids get a little antsy, especially if their stock rises a little. So, I watched this last year, kind of following Ole Miss's recruiting, helping Zach Berry cover Ole Miss recruiting. Ole Miss started slow, and then as the season ended, they gained momentum and started flipping a lot of guys. And, Lane Kiffin was asked about that, and I remember the answer was, don't really pay attention to that. Don't push for early commitments. Don't pay attention to commitments. It's not over till it's over. And I suspect with a lot of the guys you just mentioned, that still kind of remains the case.
Well, it is, and everyone, I particularly don't pay attention to where a school is ranked, because numbers are one thing. Numbers may not hold up, as you're suggesting, and then guys that will flip. Now, last year was the biggest anomaly in Alabama and flipping it around. But anyway, it's really early. But the players are intriguing, and certainly we want to keep you up to date on what's going on, at least to this point. Well, let's get right into it. Let's move on to the film room breakdown, and we're going to talk about Mississippi State first. We'll go in alphabetical order, and my Louisiana education says M comes before S, so we'll do that. If you look at the first year under Mike Leach, it started off with a bang. Certainly the big win over LSU. Everyone was aflutter with, this guy's going to take the SEC by storm. The storyline of that game was LSU and their stubbornness in playing man coverage, which if you run this offense, basically there are two things that they really do in their offense. And, they really torture man coverage, and they did it to the tune of record numbers. And then we're off and running, except the inconsistencies that showed up, I think, in Mike Leach's past showed up again. And you saw teams, particularly, starting with Barry Odom, but others that dropped 8 in Mississippi State, would not run the football. I mean, they threw 77% of the time, and it really affected how they were able to be effective. So the season was, very inconsistent, maybe frustrating. You could see the Mike Leach effect with him talking about entitled players and whatnot. One thing you know about Mike, it's never going to be his fault. It's somebody else's. And I just think that he has to evolve his air raid offense. Like, Lincoln Riley, Cliff Kingsbury in the NFL come from that style and system. They don't run the air raid. They run variations and incorporate the run game a little bit better. They've got to find a way, when I studied them last year, to drop 8, and they must be able to run the football. And Mike has not shown an ability to believe in that. That's what has to happen. His system has fit well against Pac-12 defenses and, quite frankly, Big 12 defenses. But with tougher SEC defenses, with so much man coverage being played, it's a real challenge, and he's never been really good at adjusting to it. defensively, they actually schemed pretty well. I thought Zach Arnett did a really good job. I thought they created confusion with a lot of different looks. They played well up front. The problem I see is the overall lack of talent on defense, depth-wise, to match up consistency. And then again, the lack of commitment to the running game is going to hurt a defense. So we can talk about talent, and we will talk about some of the talent that they have on defense and defensive talent last year. But much like I talked about Oklahoma on their level, they're not going to get over the hump unless they're able to run a 4-minute offense effectively. It can't just all be 2-minute offense. So for Mississippi State, in finding their level of consistency, they need to be able to run the football a little bit more when they are invited to do so. The offensive turnover rate, the snaps to turnovers, was the worst in the SEC offensively. 122nd nationally. 13% of Mississippi State's touchdowns last year were by their defense. Think about that for a second. The offense lost every fumble. I don't know that I've seen a team fumble the football more than a dozen times and lose every fumble. They gave up the most sacks in the SEC last year. That wasn't all on the offensive line, but a lot of the system. They turned the ball over 25 times. That led to 84 points. Think about this. They gave up 7.61 points per game off of turnovers. You're giving an opponent a little more than a touchdown a game with turnovers. Just can't happen. Lost 3 games by 1 possession last year. So put that in perspective of the loose ends, the smart football, not just the aesthetic beauty. As we used to talk about the NFL all the time about Mike Martz was always concerned about the style and not as much about the substance. That's a little bit what I see with Mike. He's got to develop that running game. Passing game is got to take advantage of the 8-man drops. All his offense does is run space routes versus zone and run rub routes, crossing routes versus man. And so it's a very simplistic offense. They've got about 14 pass plays and 3 runs. They just replicate it over and over in practice till they just can't get it wrong. But SEC plays more man-to-man coverage, as I mentioned earlier. And so the running backs have to find the second and third options a little more than you had to do in the Big 12 or the Pac-12. And versus SEC pass rushes, that's going to be more difficult. And that led to the turnovers and the issues, problems. I think a more athletic quarterback, and they have one coming down the pipeline, may help them a little bit. But when you look at the team, and we talked about, reminder again, blue grades are the best grade players in the country. They are the players that make the difference in close games. The red players are players that win for you. The purple grades are players you can win with. They're quality starters. I think there's some good players. I think both their corners are red grade players. I've got them graded that way. I think their nickelback, Jalen Green, is a red grade player. I think their linebacker, Aaron Bruley, is a red grade player. I think Tyrus Wheat, their Sam linebacker, is a red grade player. And I think Jaden Crumity is a red grade player on offense. I think Jaden Wally and I think their tackle, Charles Cross, are red grade players. I think they've got some talent on this team, but this was Mike Leach's best recruiting class that he's ever had. Now, I know he's been at Texas Tech and he's been at Washington State. This is the best recruiting class he's ever put together this past year. It was 11th in the SEC. Therein lies the issue. Yes, people say, oh, he's going to be able to recruit a better grade of player at Mississippi State. Yes, he is. Everything is relative. So it's still going to be about being able to match up and utilizing his style, and I think adjusting to his style. At this level in the SEC, there's going to be a big-time challenge with the pass rushes, with the cover folks. You will get coaches that, as we saw last year, adjust. And if Mike's not able to adjust to the adjustments, then you could be some issues. Real quickly, going through a little bit of some thoughts, too. looking at kind of what they've done with their roster, the quarterback situation, Jack Abraham is a kid that was really impressive in the spring. He's the transfer from Southern Miss. You go ahead.
He's an Oxford boy.
Yeah, and
Jack's parents well. Yeah.
Yeah, and Will Rogers looked good at the end of last year, and I think is a really good player. Jaquavius Marks, Dylan Johnson, I think are productive, quality runners. As I mentioned, Jalen Wiley, he was one of the best freshmen in the country, certainly in the SEC. I think Ledrick Griffin is a name to remember. That's going to be a great returner and help them a lot. I thought the offensive line really contributed to a lot of their problems, not all of their protection problems. It was a big part of it. So I think depth is an issue there and a concern. I think depth is an issue on the defensive side, quite frankly. I think that's something we've got to watch going forward. I do like the linebackers. As I said, I love the corners. I think they've got the ability to cover in the slot pretty well, too. But I think there's some bigger issues here. I do look at the schedule, and we'll go over it, Neil. This is in the second year, Mike's teams, his offenses have gotten better in his other stops. But let's see if he's able to do it now.
His teams, though, haven't gotten better. And this is the thing that you hear a lot of people talk about. Mike Leach and boy, in year two, they make these colossal jumps. And they did at Washington State, right? They went from 3-9 in 2012 to 6-7 in 2013. Went from 1-8 in the Pac-12 to 4-5 in the Pac-12. At Texas Tech, in his first year, he was 7-6, 3-5. Basically kept the same record a year later, 7-5, 4-4. Both years lost the bowl game, all that stuff. And to me, that's ancient history. It's 20 years ago. Last season, they were 4-7. 3-7 in the league. They won their bowl game, that game that kind of got marred by the brawl at the end, the Armed Forces Bowl against Tulsa, I believe. I thought you hit, the big thing, which is, can this offense work in the SEC? And can this offense work in the SEC at a place where it's difficult to accumulate the amount of talent that the other schools that you play against have? I mean, obviously, you're not as talented as Alabama, as Auburn, as Texas A&M, as LSU. I don't think they're as talented as Ole Miss going into this season. I don't think they're immensely more talented than Arkansas. And so you start looking at they got to play Kentucky this season. I mean, I've got their schedule up here, Chris. What's interesting is ESPN's FPI really likes them. They've got Mississippi State going 8-4. They've got Mississippi State losing to Texas A&M, Alabama, at Arkansas, and Auburn. At Auburn. They've got Mississippi State beating LSU on September the 25th. This is the ESPN's FPI computers. And they've got Mississippi State beating Ole Miss on Thanksgiving night in Starkville. Not by much. The LSU is 50.9%. The Ole Miss is 53.7%. But the computer sees something that, I'll be honest, when I look at them, I don't see. Because when I look at them, I still see a team that defensively is going to be challenged in stopping the run. They're going to be challenged at the line of scrimmage. And offensively, they're simply not committed to running the football. And if you're not committing to running the football, when you play against teams that have edge rushers and elite corners, and I think about LSU with those elite corners they have, I don't see how it works. Now, Grind asked a question that we'll get to in the mailbag later, I should say. But a year ago, they lit up LSU and then struggled passing the football against Auburn, against Alabama, against some of the other teams in the league. So everyone's got a year to scout them now. They've had a year to scout the quarterback. They know what the team looks like in terms of personnel. This is the one that I'm prepared to be really wrong on, because maybe I don't completely discount the computers when they do this. But the computers are seeing something I don't.
Well, I think out of the gate after Louisiana Tech's no picnic, that NC State is a better team than probably SEC fans know or understand. That's a challenge, and I mean, wouldn't surprise me at all if they lose that game. I mean, that's a very losable and a winnable game. Memphis, they should win. They've fared well against them, and I say should, but they need to. If they're certainly going to get anywhere close to what the expectations are. Look, I don't think they, we saw them. I think everyone's looking at LSU and taking that was a blowout last year. So therefore, it's probably going to be at least a win for Mississippi State this year. I don't see it that way. Certainly from a talent standpoint, I'd be very surprised if they beat LSU. Don't think they've got much of a chance against A&M. Certainly Alabama. I think Kentucky's going to be very, very difficult. Certainly going to be Tennessee State. But I think, Arkansas, Auburn, Ole Miss, you can make a case either way. Those are the swing games. I mean, I think there's only four games I'll tell you for certain I know that they're going to win. Now, there's maybe 3 more that I think that could win. And if I have it right, I think there's going to be a game that they win that you don't think they're going to win, and I think there's a game they're going to lose that you're going to say, what happened there? That's been the history there. So I don't know. I mean, I think more 7 wins, maybe 6 wins, 8 would be really, really good, and probably a little bit too high, and probably putting a little too much into Mike. I hate saying this because I think it's kind of a rude thing, and I don't mean this way. I think the perception of Mike Leach, is different publicly than in the football world. I think Mike gets a lot of credit, and I think he deserves, I think he probably gets more credit. If you were to use the term overrated, I would put Mike in that category, meaning he's good, but people think he's great. People think he's a genius, and his genius is his oversimplistic ways. He is very rigid. He does not adjust very well, and that's going to be the challenge, quite frankly, again, to whether he can be successful or not. Because I do think, and we've heard it before, that, Dan Mullen's had some success. So I don't think, winning 6 or 7 games a year is going to get people excited there. I don't think he's on the hot seat if they win 6 or 7 this year. But I think you do that for 4 years in a row. Maybe you get 1 year. I think you're going to have to schedule your way out of conference into where I think they need to get, because again, I think they can upset folks. Look, they can get people if you're not prepared for them. But I do think the defensive talent in the SEC is quite a bit different than in his last 2 stops, and that could be the ultimate difference. And when they're going to invite you to run, if they're going to drop 8, and you're not going to want to run the football, and you're going to throw it 77% of the time, and then you're going to turn the football over and they probably had 2-3 more wins on their schedule with better coaching last year, because that defense was pretty salty, pretty good talent, but they don't play to it real well. And again, I think people struggle with the overall total understanding of football. They think, Mike's got the offense, they need to get the defense figured out. No, there's a reason why Mike's defenses are never good, because they don't play complementary football. And that's the difference between being a innovative, stylistic offensive play caller and a really good head coach. And we'll see how that plays out.
The schedule is really interesting the way it lays out. And they get Louisiana Tech at home to open the season, and I think that's a game they win. And then it gets interesting, like you mentioned, North Carolina State in Starkville. Dave Doran's nothing exciting. There's nothing about NC State that makes you, get up in the morning and go, "Oh, Wolfpack football." But they're interesting. At Memphis, you live in this part of the country like I do. You know that Memphis gets really excited for SEC teams when they come into the Liberty Bowl to play in that stadium. So then after that, that's assuming that they survive that round of games. It's LSU, Texas A&M, Alabama, bang, 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 with a week off in between Texas A&M and Alabama. Those are 3 games that I think Mississippi State loses. So if they lose one of those other 2 games, NC State, Memphis, all of a sudden you're at the halfway point with some problems on your schedule. They get Vanderbilt, that's a W. They get Kentucky at home. I'm higher on Kentucky than a lot of people. I'm kind of bullish on Kentucky. And then they have a November road trip that I think is really difficult. Frankly, I think I like the other team. I like the home team in both of these games. They have to go to Fayetteville on November the 6th. If you're trying to find a way, we did this with Arkansas the other day, if you're trying to find a way for Arkansas to get to bowl eligibility, the Mississippi State game's absolutely paramount for them. They'll be dialed in on it. And then, look, I think they're losing at Auburn. I do. I think they lose at Auburn on November the 13th. They beat Tennessee State. In this scenario that I lay out, when they play Ole Miss, I don't know that there's a whole lot in it for them other than playing the role of spoiler. And we'll see. Like I said, it's one of these teams that I've kind of got circled on my preseason list, if you will, of, hey, this is a team that there's a really good chance that I'm bad wrong on, because like I said, not to beat a broken record, but goodness, the computers like them a lot more than I do.
One thing I will say, somebody's got to finish last in the West. I don't know who that's going to be. The team's going to be pretty good. The record may not reflect it, but it'll be a pretty good team in the West. Well, we will jump into a look at South Carolina. That's coming up next.
First, I want to tell you that we are brought to you by Blue Sky. Blue Sky believes in being fast, fresh, and friendly. Through the thoughtful layout and cleanliness of their stores, Blue Sky hopes to provide customers with a fast and easy buying experience. From services to products, Blue Sky plans to keep things fresh and always provide the freshest flavors of their brand name products and the best services available. They even bring in some of the newest products on the market to their stores to provide an even better customer experience. A smile can say it all, and at Blue Sky, they want to show their customers that they care about them and their shopping experience, and they'll always strive to improve their efforts to accomplish exactly that. So check out Blue Sky today at any one of their 48 store locations across the Southeast.
And we appreciate them joining us. Well, we go from Mississippi State to a South Carolina team that, quite frankly, as I look and study them, this is another team we talked about, on Tuesday, the Vanderbilt program and how bad it was and how bad of a situation. When I look at this South Carolina team, it's really bad. This may be, you throw in the candidates of the best, of the worst defenses, they're certainly in that conversation. So it's going to be interesting to see. And Ole Miss is bad. Vanderbilt, it was just really, really bad. This was, and again, be patient with this recruiting. It was the worst. It wasn't even a top 75 recruiting class nationally. It was the worst in the SEC this past year. New coach. And let's remind folks what a wacky looking situation that they had. I took a note here. I went through the timeline again, how this played out. If you look at what happened, they hired Mike Bobo on December 27th as offense coordinator. Will Friend was hired at the same time. Tracy Rocker, D-line coach, was kept. By January 7th, Mike Bobo had left to go, and Friend had left to go to Auburn. Tracy Rocker went to Auburn, his alma mater, before going to the Eagles. It was a tough stretch there for recruiting and from an adjustment standpoint, trying to get back into play. So I think that's going to be, it better be a strength of Shane Beamer's, but they're off to a weak start. And when you look at the roster, it's, again, got some holes into it. They're thin at receiver. The quarterback, Doty, has got a chance, but I need to see more of him. I think he's got some ability. I think what we're going to see, based upon Beamer's background at Oklahoma working with Lincoln, and Marcus Satterfield, who's going to come in and run the offense, is going to run a lot of RPOs, try to be multiple, try to work around the talent. They've got some tight end H-back types, so I think we'll see an emphasis on running the football maybe a little bit more, but in an RPO setting to give them some good looks. Defensively, again, it's going to be a different look. It's a nickel-based, which is vastly different than what Will ran. The defense, with all that talent they've had coming through Columbia, they're not the same right now. So we'll see how this plays out. I think they're going to be big players maybe for a year or two in the portal. I thought it was one of the least explosive defensive fronts that I looked at. I thought they were maybe second worst in the SEC to Vandy, 119th nationally. What I mean by that is they didn't generate tackles for losses versus the run. They did not get enough base pass rush. They had to manufacture pressure, which hurt them. Opposing offenses got into the end zone versus South Carolina, the second most in the SEC and 119th nationally. Defense gave up 10 points in the first quarter average. I mean, you give up 10 points. It's early on. It's tough. It's the worst in the SEC and like 120th nationally. Really bad. The worst run blocking offensive line unit in the SEC last year, without question. They got the least push in breaking down film than anybody, and amongst the 10 worst in college football. Now again, relative, you're playing better opponents in some of those teams, but really graded out poorly. Look, they talk about, after those guys left, they talked about, because you've got neither one of their coordinators have called a play in Power 5 football. And Shane Beamer is a green head coach. Now they're selling that, well, we want people that'll be here and we want people that are committed. Well, I get it, but this was all after the guys that they hired left. I mean, if they didn't want Mike Bobo, they wouldn't have hired him in the first place. He left. And so they're going to have to work through that. It's a program that has great fan support. The expectations, I think, are reasonable. They've won one conference title in their history, 1969, the ACC with Coach Paul Dietzel. Certainly it's not been good, and it's combined with the fact that Georgia is elite in recruiting at an elite level. Clemson across the state is just kicking butt, and they're kind of left in the shadows and in a program that's in a complete rebuild. They only have won 6 games. You have to look at it and study it. They've only won 6 games over the past 2 seasons in the league, and they've just got a bad roster starting off. I don't like their speed at receiver. That's a real concern at this point. Doty's, again, an interesting guy. Now, they did get the kid that I looked at on film, Jason Brown. He's from St. Francis, Pennsylvania, and he's an interesting kid. He's got some experience. I don't think they're good enough yet at quarterback. We'll see. Maybe Doty will prove me wrong there. I do think they've got an outstanding back in Kevin Harris. I think he's one of the more underrated guys, and I think he and Lloyd can be really good backs. And Harris ran hard, and he probably was the best after-contact runner in the SEC against SEC competition last year. He was really good, really, really good, and didn't get a lot of help. Now, there were better backs in the league, but, boy, he had to really be his own blocker more than most. I do like their tight end situation a little bit. Let's get into their color grades and what they look like. Again, blues, reds, no blues. Kevin Harris is a red. Nick Muse, the tight end, I think is a red grade player. I think he's a good player. He's good in both the pass and run game. I think Javon Gwynn, the right guard, is a red grade player. And I do think on defense, Anagabi and Zach Pickens are 2 really good ones that I think can be good players at the next level. I think that they've got with Jalen Brooks a guy that can be a big receiver weapon. The offensive line, they lost Hutcherson into the NFL. It's returning a few guys I think that can be adequate on the O-line. I think Pickens is the key guy, and I think he was because he was a highly recruited guy. You see why they expect him to take a real big step up this year. I thought we talked about the struggles with the defense. It usually bears out on the defensive front, and it was. The defensive front wasn't very good. Now, Ernest Jones departed. That's a big loss because he was the guy that got him set correctly, and that's going to be a big challenge for new defensive coordinator Clayton White. He's going to have to kind of move things around a little bit, as I mentioned. They're going to play a lot of base nickel, so they only play a couple of linebackers. I thought that the corner position, that was hit really hard with Horn and Mukamalu, both really good NFL caliber talents. That's a big loss for them. So this is a major rebuild. I'm concerned, and everyone's excited. I don't know that there was a coach in recent memory that was universally loved by ex-players and whatnot, Shane and his dad and everything. I I think this is a big uphill climb for the program, and I think there's going to be a lot of growing pains for Shane. So how well he can do, time will tell, but he's going to need some time because I think he's going to have to learn on the job quite a bit. And I think the only thing they got going for him is maybe more patience than some programs in the conference. So that may be the salvation grace, but the recruiting is going to have to, and I'm talking that it's not off to a good start. Even this year, it's early. We just talked about in the first segment, but they've got some work to do on the recruiting front because if they don't flip that around, the one thing Will did pretty well is recruit, and they had some good players that lined up on Sundays. There's few and far between to those right now. They've got to hit it hard.
South Carolina's going to appreciate Will Muschamp a lot more in a year or two. It's going to sound like a smart aleck comment, and Dan's going to laugh too. I think we just talked about South Carolina more than I probably think I'll talk about them the entire rest of the season combined. There's nothing about them that stands out. The one thing they have going for them is that they're in the same division with Vanderbilt. That's kind of it right now. But Beamer's got his hands full. I mean, he's got to prove a lot of people wrong. He's Frank Beamer's son. I know they like him. I know he loves Columbia. I know he's in it for the long haul and all that. But so was Will Muschamp, and that didn't work. At least they said it didn't work. Will Muschamp, like you said, had players. Can you recruit the kind of players to South Carolina in the midst of not just losing, but really losing? Can you recruit those kinds of players to get you over the hump in a division where you have Georgia, like you mentioned, you've got Florida, you've got a very steady, at worst, Kentucky team. You're recruiting against Clemson. You're recruiting. It's a brutal deal, man. And you look at the schedule this year. They get Eastern Carolina at home. That's a win. At least it better be. They go to East Carolina. That should be a win. And then after that, and I'm reading FPI percentages on ESPN. A 6.9% chance to beat Georgia, which is nice on ESPN to give them 6.9%. 42.5% against Kentucky, which I think is way overdone. They should beat Troy. They go to Tennessee. They should beat Vanderbilt at home. And then after that, it's Texas A&M, Florida, Missouri, Auburn, Clemson. It's this demoralizing murderer's row of L's heading into recruiting. And then you got to convince kids, hey, we're almost there. And kids aren't stupid. I've always said you can't fool the kids. Kids can feel momentum. Kids can see momentum. So the way the schedule works out, they got no gifts at all because after October the 16th, there's a really strong chance that you get your ass kicked. Boom, 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 boom. Literally no weekend off. October 23rd. I'm sorry, I stand corrected. You get Halloween off and they'll need it. And then after that, it's November. It's Florida. That's a mauling. At Missouri, that could easily be a mauling. Auburn at home. Auburn's going to have something to play for late in the season because they're going to know what they're dealing with and stuff. And it's a first-year coach and all that. And then you got to play Clemson. And Clemson might not even care and still beat you by 45 points. And so then you've got to convince kids, hey, come to this green coach, this staff that doesn't call plays, nobody knows who they are, and we're playing in this league. And if there's any kind of a blue chip player, everybody else is recruiting them too. It's almost impossible. Like literally, when I think about South Carolina, and I'm not knocking on them because I kind of like their program. I love Columbia, cool town. Everything about their fan base is fun. Their games there are fun. I covered a Thursday night game there years ago, and Ole Miss was number 3 or 4 in the country or whatever. And South Carolina beat Ole Miss, and the stadium was so loud that the place shook. I mean, there is no fan base that deserves a winner more than that one. But fellas, you can't wish something into existence. You can't deserve something into existence. I don't see it.
It's going to be a challenge. And again, it is a great place. And it's probably among the programs that without any great tradition, they've supported it like the programs that have won titles before. I mean, they really have been really, really good. So I think that it's going to be interesting and probably a very rough year early on for South Carolina. Hey, if you like that, hope you did. Maybe you didn't like it if you're a South Carolina fan, but hey, it's just what we're here. We're here to give you the unvarnished truth of how we see it and taking a look at it up on Monday's show live, and you'll drop Tuesday morning. We're going to get into the Auburn Tigers, the Tennessee Vols, later in the week when we do this show live on Thursday, and it'll drop Friday morning, and or later in the week we'll get to it. Ole Miss and Missouri. So Auburn, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Missouri coming up. If you missed Arkansas Vanderbilt, where were you? Go back, check it out. We got it on Tuesday's show. We've got it labeled there. You can find it on LandryFootball.com as well, and that'll take you to the link. And I want to remind you again to search for, like, and subscribe to the Landry Football Podcast channel on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, wherever you get your podcasts, so you can listen to us here on SEC football and beyond. So let's want to get into a couple of national football thoughts that are going on. Some big news, big commitment, real quick, for Texas from a 4-star defensive back, Austin Jordan. Really good kid from track guy that really is football fast as well, from Denton, Texas, Oklahoma, Ohio State. Good get for Sark and the Longhorns. Notre Dame having a really good last 10 days, 2 weeks, getting a verbal from an outstanding linebacker, Jalen Sneed. He kind of cut his schools down to 5 in May, and it came down as a South Carolina native. This is the type of guy, again, I know that you need to keep at home. We just talked about South Carolina. Jalen Sneed going to Notre Dame. And some news I want to give out my best to good friend Frank Solich, announced on Wednesday. He's the former head coach at Nebraska, former running back coach for over 30 years, played fullback for Bob Devaney, and coached running backs, all those great running backs at Nebraska. Played under Coach Osborne. It was Frank Solich that was a running back coach. And quite frankly, Nebraska hadn't looked close to what Nebraska looked like since Frank left and they fired him. He's done a phenomenal job at Ohio, where I got my master's, by the way. Great school there in Little Athens, Ohio. He's been there.
You keep mispronouncing Nebraska. It's Tennessee West.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I was wondering. It was a good chance I was mispronouncing it, because I usually do that a lot. You realize that he went 115, 82, and 60. He's been there 16 years in Athens, Ohio.
Yeah. And
he's been 77 and 46 in MAC play, which in Ohio was in that bottom level. MAC schools look all the same except Northern Illinois. If you close your eyes, you go to Bowling Green, and you fall asleep, you're in a fog, or you have one of those late night stupors, and you wake up, and Miami of Ohio, you think you're at Bowling Green, because they all look the same. The only difference is if you have a quarterback, it'll send you up to the top. Frank's been the model of consistency there. So good luck to Tim Albin, the assistant head coach, is taking over. Difficult task replacing him. And then let's get to some NFL news. I'm not quite sure what to say other than it's sad, it's disturbing. The Richard Sherman situation. Don't know if you've heard the 911 call or the details. Neil, I don't know what to say about it, quite frankly, other than I'm concerned about it. When you hear things like there was thoughts of suicide, you don't know what's going on with people. I'm just going to say it's really sad, and I don't know what this means for Richard. His future, obviously, short term's not very good, and was a guy that was, recently I've been talking about on Landry Football. Talked to the folk at the Saints, went out, visited with them. There was, I don't think anybody had any inclination that there was something there that was bubbling underneath the surface. I know he's a little bit of a hothead, but a guy that's come up from the rough part of town in California, and a Stanford guy, bright guy, tough situation.
Well, it's definitely that. Some of the details are, like you said, they're very troubling. They're difficult to think about. He 2 a.m. It was about an hour after he had been involved in an automobile accident where he ran his car into a concrete barrier and left it. They later, traced it back to him. He tells he's according to the caller who was identified who identified herself as Ashley Sherman. It's actually his wife, Ashley Moss. She said that Sherman was acting drunk and belligerent, was threatening to kill himself, displaying aggressive behavior, was sending text messages to people saying he was going to hang himself. As of right now, and he's still in custody, which is standard procedure in a domestic violence incident like this. I mean, his career, I would think, and this is the least of the concerns at this point, but they had to put a canine unit on him to subdue him. He was threatening to fight police if they interrupted. This guy's 33 years old. His family is now trying to kind of they're trying to get him out of jail, number one. And then number two, they're making sure that they know that nobody else was harmed. He was the only person that was harmed. And that was the harm came at the I guess the teeth of a police dog. 33 years old. You mentioned he was trying out for teams or talking to teams. He talked to the Saints as a potential landing spot. He's a guy that was on the NFL executive committee, I think, as recently as now. This is the end of his career. This has not been the best offseason in the world for a handful of NFL guys. I mean, we've just stopped talking about Deshaun Watson. Months ago, we talked about Deshaun Watson all the time, and now it is just understood, I guess, that Deshaun Watson's not going to play this season. I mean, Deshaun Watson is not that far removed from being the big subject of trade rumors. And so here you've got another guy that's a big name in the NFL, Richard Sherman, who I would assume this is the end of his career.
Yeah, there's no other way to look at it. And it certainly, it's one thing to have an incident that, all right, maybe a guy had a couple of drinks and got picked up, and that is dangerous and foolish. It's one thing to just have a disturbance in a bar and you punch somebody. To have this situation to go awry is very disturbing. Some of the acts that he's had, even with in the conference championship game a few years ago, when he kind of ranted and raved on the sideline, that's nothing compared to this. But it just goes to show you, sometimes when you tend to lose it and you tend to be you come off as a little bit unstable, as we learn more and more about mental sicknesses or issues of some sort, however you want to classify it, it makes you wonder. What really goes on in some of these people's minds. Some other news around the league I want to pass along. The Bills have promoted Ken Dorsey, former Miami quarterback, and he's really developed a nice coaching career, gotten to know him real well. He's the new quarterback coach and passing game coordinator, and kind of the right-hand man for Brian Daboll. Why are they doing this? Brian is going to get a head coaching job. Brian, the brief and successful offensive coordinator for Alabama, Nick Saban, and previously with that, Bill Belichick, working under that staff. He has done a great job. Now, Ken has done a lot of good work with Josh Allen, who's one of the bright quarterbacks in the league. So he's going to be Brian's right-hand man. So the idea is, I think they at least want to get Ken. They want to get him more involved to where they can determine whether they want to promote him, because it's only a matter of if, not when, Brian gets a head coaching job. And, speaking of this, Xavier Howard from the Dolphins, he just signed a new deal 2 years ago. He's got 4 years left on his current deal. It was a 5-year, $75.25 million deal. Not happy. He thinks he is undervalued, and he wants to open up negotiations again. So that's where it works in the NFL in some cases. Jordan Matthews, remember him from Vanderbilt fame? He's put on some weight. He's now working out as tight end. I hear he's about 245 pounds, and he's working out for people in the league, and he's, seeing if he can get a chance there. And For Neil's Chicago Bears, for folks who don't know, Neil is a Chicago Bear fan. Send condolences there. Yeah, it's talking with the Bears staff there and kind of what they're doing. There's been a lot of criticism there about, well, why don't they run the football more and David Montgomery, and we're talking about their staff. And yeah, they would like to get David Montgomery about 20 touches a game, but as I talked about a little bit earlier, you got to get more leads. You got to get into more 4-minute situations so you can run the darn ball. I get this a lot, and I get a chuckle. Why don't they run this guy more? You're down by 10 or 14 and 13, 14 points in the second half in the NFL. You're not running the football a whole lot. So they want to run him, and they want to run him a lot because he's averaging 20 rushing attempts a game, the Bears are winning. The Bears are salting games away, and I think it'll be really successful. And oh, by the way, talked to Bill Belichick this week. Great comments about Damian Harris, former SEC. He is right now, looks like, just a little, tells me that maybe, just maybe, he's not into saying this. I sense he might be the number one back, and we'll see what he can do in camp if he can hold on to it. They got Ramondre Stevenson from Oklahoma, Sony Michel, but he's off to a really good start. They really certainly he's very talented, but they like the way he prepares. He has a keen understanding of protections. He's worked really, really hard. So just some idle thoughts. Kind of slow right now. Not a lot of workouts, a lot of off time before everything gets going. Training camps are not far away in the NFL. So those are some thoughts. Hey guys, we turn. Go ahead, Neil. Go ahead.
I talked to Justin Fields, and we got this.
We got this.
We might give the ball to David Montgomery. We might not. The thing is, we're just going to score.
You're gonna run Justin.
Justin and I, we got it taken care of. We talked about this. He says he thinks he can put up 52 a game, and we might give it to Montgomery. We might not, but we got it. I don't know. This whole Bears taking shots at the Bears. The Trubisky thing is over. We solved it. Okay, we got Justin Fields. It's all good now.
I like the Bears. It's just since doing a show with you, I just tend to want to, give shots anytime I can. Every chance I can, I just look to do it. I do that. Hey, Dan, Dan has made a run for the mailbox. But before we do, Dan, has anybody told you that you look an awful lot like Bryson DeChambeau? And I think it's the hat. Is that a Puma hat?
It is. It is a Puma golf hat.
Bryson DeChambeau, for you golf fans, he wears what do we call I call them the Ben Hogan hats. He wears that, in a tournament. Yeah. But he wears the Dan Matthews hat on practice rounds. But you got the golf shirt on and the Puma hat? Looking good, man.
It's Open Championship time. I mean, I've got to be able to bring something to the table, I mean, that was quite a name you dropped right there for people that don't know your past as well.
He had a rant today, by the way.
Oh, really?
Check it out. He had a rant, and it was so bad. His club manufacturer is Cobra.
Yeah.
Yes, he went and he said they're working on this and that. I've never seen a manufacturer put out a statement.
Right.
And they called him, they said, it's kind of like an 8-year-old that you think, they say they don't love you, and you say, well, then you realize they're an 8-year-old. Like, wow. I mean, that's a company that's paying you millions, but anyway, I digress.
No,
that's the golf segment of the...
I was going to say, I guess the connection we can have is when Aaron Rodgers played with him. I don't know about you guys, if you watched the match. And for those
I did.
Think to us. Did you kind of get the sense that Rodgers, maybe not annoyed with him, but he kind of got on his nerves a little bit, like he was talking about the too much information and all that kind of stuff? I don't know. Maybe that was just me. I kind of got that vibe because it seems like personality-wise, Bryson and Rodgers probably on opposite ends of the spectrum personality-wise.
I think personality-wise, anybody's on the opposite ends of DeChambeau. I mean, he is I've just heard some of the things, and they say he is like ultra weird in physics, mechanical stuff, and he does things like he recently parted ways with his caddy, and they asked Jim Bones Mackay, longtime filmmaker, would you be interested in it? And he politely said, I don't think so.
Yeah.
That was it. So.
Yeah. No,
What's in the mailbag? What are the people? What are the peeps talking and asking, Dan?
Yeah, so I want to go right into one of them is a very loyal listener and also commenter, Grind. And Neil, I know really like this question, so let's start with it. It's a great leadoff hitter here. Why was Leach able to dissect LSU's man coverage, but Auburn was able to keep them from posting up the same results last year?
Good question. Auburn did a really good job of communicating, and plus they backed off. They showed some press and then backed off into some press bail. They communicated. Look, it's not just playing man, but are you playing press or you playing press bail and are communicating? So obviously LSU did an awful job of communicating. So LSU played mostly press. Guys came off. They got picked. They didn't communicate. Safety's looking at corners. Derek Stingley, who looks like he's a top 5 talent, he looked like a reject most of last year because things are communicating. So that was the difference, is how they played man. They communicated well, and they mixed up press and press bail, and they were much more effective. The most effective was the dropping 8. And if you can get home with some pressure, and I'm going to tell you, a lot of the pressure that we talked about with State was 3 and 4 man pressure. So the problems with the offensive line, it wasn't like they were struggling to block the blitz. That can be troublesome. They were struggling against 3 and 4 man protections. 5 can't block 4. 5 struggling with 3. You got problems.
All right, so I want to be able to bring in both of you on this one. And this was a statement in the comments that I want to turn into a question from me, because I think this is really interesting. And it is in regards to Mike Leach. This from Joey McPherson. Not to mention he has to flip a roster that was more designed to pound the ball and to a passing every play type of offense. It is a rough transition. So is that necessarily the transition right now that is facing Mike Leach at Mississippi State?
Yeah, they're going from kind of a balanced attack under Mullen to this, system that if you watch much Mississippi high school football, and Mississippi State has to make hay in the state of Mississippi. If you watch a lot of it, they don't spread it all over the place. There are a handful of programs that throw the ball some, but it's still pretty run-oriented high school attacks. I just don't know where you go get all the players that you want. I think he's going to have to really depend on the transfer portal. Like I said this at the beginning, I feel like I'm piling on, and if they prove me wrong, I will absolutely own it. I have no problems. I just kind of wonder.
Well, I think that a couple of things. I thought he was left with good defensive personnel. And I know you're talking about the offense, Joey, there's an adjustment. But see, that's what coaching is to a large degree, utilizing what you have and being able to adjust. Look, we talked about the problems with the offensive line. It's not that those guys are not talented, but you have enormous line splits in Mike Leach's system. That is, so anything that he does, it's a big adjustment because, so yes, that's an issue. I think the biggest adjustment is the quarterback. It's tough. The quarterback has to make the read. As I said, they have very few plays. Okay, the reason why he has an index card and people say, "Boy," is because that's all it takes to read. He doesn't have that many plays. He replicates it. I've been to his practices over and over again. I've seen them practice the same route for 2 hours. That's why they're really good at what they do. It's just that when you can adjust to it and take it away, they don't really have other ways to beat you. They're not going to hand it off and do things. Now, they've got line splits where you can run the football. We're not talking about pounding the ball. Running the football is not pounding it. It's running it. If people are going to drop 8, hand the ball off. Neil, who runs marathons, could average a good 5.5 yards. I'm telling you, he probably wouldn't enjoy getting hit, but he'd get 5 to 6 yards before you hit him. My point is you've got lots of run room. He's not willing to. He doesn't believe in it. He believes in the screen game is the run game. They passed it 77% of the time. Well, they ran it in 2019 like 64% of the time. So it's a drastic change. It's always a drastic change in what Mike does because Mike does what he does. That's it. And to this point, he's not really adjusted. I think if he doesn't adjust, he won't have success, to answer everybody's question. If he learns to adjust, he can. I think he's bright. I've gotten to know him he's bright, but I'm telling you, stubborn, my God, stubborn beyond, I can't even describe how stubborn. Excuse me, that's got to change. As I said, look at the guys that have come. Everybody credits Kingsbury and all those people are not running air raid, they're running derivatives of it. And they're having success. But that's coaching. Schemes don't win. It's the ability to be able to take something that works and modify it. Schemes are changing. They're just constantly changing. So how do you adjust to it and modify and do that? And so when you have coaches, and what you would want out of Mike Leach is his mind and his brain to be able to say, if they give us this look, this is what we can do alternatively to have success. Because that's what you want in a coach. Because schemes will never last. Even the old West Coast, nothing ever lasts because people constantly adjust. So it's a constant, people name it a certain thing, but what if you look at it and study it on film, you see constant derivatives of one thing and another and another and another, and that's blocking schemes. We lost Alex Gibbs this week, one of the great offensive line coaches, and he's 80 years old. And he's got a coaching tree of offensive line coaches. But what he taught in the zone blocking, a lot of that are great derivatives. The Bill Callahans and all those guys that have come under him and around him learned a lot, but you learn how to think. It's like anything else, like any other business. If you take one thing, this is not McDonald's where you take it and you press a button and everything's the same. This is more about how to evolve, and that's what Mike's going to have to learn how to do. And if he does, I think he can be successful. If he doesn't, I think it's going to be unsuccessful.
All right, so a couple more, and let's do one more about Mike Leach. This again from Grind. I really like this question. Can Mike Leach replicate what Dan Mullen did from a record/winning standpoint?
No.
I think it's going to be very difficult. Dan did and certainly I think it's going to be tough for him to stay this long because I think that what Dan did was constantly develop players, and I thought he maximized efficiency. And again, we'll see to my previous comment whether he can adjust. That's going to answer the real reason whether he can, based upon his unwillingness, to adjust. And I don't know that I could say strongly that he would.
Dan was really able to get into Hugh Freeze's head. He also Dan got a lot of momentum inside Mississippi. And I mean this as a credit to him. He's a very good coach. He was able to beat Ole Miss in his first game. Houston Nutt badly underestimated the rivalry from a recruiting standpoint, and then he began to dominate. Hugh Freeze came in and got a little bit of momentum, but the rest of that story. And Dan Mullen was able to take advantage of that and build a very consistent program at Mississippi State where they, frankly, won more than their fair share of the battles against Ole Miss. I don't think, not that Mike Leach and Lane Kiffin are going to have some sort of a feud because they're not. They're friends. But I don't think Mike's going to be able to take advantage of that aspect of the rivalry because I just don't think Lane's going to play into it. And so it's going to be difficult. Look, Dan Mullen spent several years trying to get out of Starkville, and he finally got aggressive and hired Jimmy Sexton and got out. So it's going to be difficult for Mike Leach to replicate that. And I don't know how long they give him. He was we were down the list on choices a little bit on that. It's just not a great fit.
Along those same lines, too, our final one, and this one actually coming off of what you guys talked about with South Carolina, and that is the future of the program and how viable is it for them to necessarily be one that can compete in the SEC East. Here's where I'm going with this. Let's take a look at what that program did from 2010 to 2000. We could say 14 there. And the recruiting wins that Steve Spurrier had during that time of being able to get the guys from the part of the state that, frankly, Clemson should have been getting. Jadeveon Clowney from, I believe, from Rock Hill, South Carolina, a really good area right there. Dylan Thompson from Boiling Springs. Those guys were going to South Carolina. Is that necessarily the lightning in the bottle that Shane Beamer has to be able to try to recreate, because you can have Marcus Lattimore around the program, you can have Connor Shaw around the program, but is it also too now with the behemoth that you have in the upstate there, how hard is it going to be for them to really be able to try to start to kind of chip away a little bit at what Dabo is building in the upstate and being able to get guys to say yes to Columbia, South Carolina, and not to upstate South Carolina?
Good, Neil.
It's going to be very difficult, but you're right in saying that he is going to be able to point to some of those people and say, hey, I was a part of this and we can do it again. It's been done before. It's one of the reasons that, it's one of the things that Mike Leach will probably say at Mississippi State is that he will point at the at the Dak Prescott era at Mississippi State and say, look, in the middle of November, we were number 1 in the country going to Alabama, and they absolutely were. It's one of the things Lane Kiffin says at Ole Miss when he says, hey, when the very first college football playoff projection came out, Ole Miss was in it. They were. I mean, you can get it done at those programs. There's no question, and you can get it done at South Carolina because they've won big before, not at that level, but they've been close, and they've recruited elite players, and you can recruit them again. But it's hard, and you have to grind at it, and at some point he's going to have to get a break that he can't make him. He's going to have to get some luck is what I'm saying, Dan. There's going to have to be a major prospect who has coattails, who just wants to go to South Carolina, who can help bring other players to South Carolina. Frankly, he needs Dabo to leave and go to Alabama when Nick Saban steps down. He's going to need a break somewhere in these first 3-4 years. Here's the good news for Shane Beamer. I think they're going to give him lots of time. They really like him. He's a very personable guy. They're going to give him time. He's going to be good on the booster circuit, all of that stuff. But at some point, he's going to have to get a dose of luck, I think, and that's the part that's hard to predict.
Everything's relative. So when Missouri made it and won the East, well, why can't South Carolina? Well, when Missouri got there, Georgia was underachieving. Florida was underachieving. Tennessee was underachieving. So there's a path. Could South Carolina get there? They haven't gotten all the way. There's a reason why they've only won one conference title in their history, 1969 in the ACC. That's it. That's all they've ever done. There's a reason for that. I think that if I would have stacked them up in terms of resources, fan support, what they can do, that they would be 4th in the East. They could absolutely do maybe in a different style, do what Kentucky's doing. Well, Kentucky and Missouri is trying to figure out who's going to finish, 3rd in the East. It's pretty good. Why couldn't that be South Carolina down the road? Well, it depends. I mean, if Tennessee gets better, then you're probably not going to get that high. If and Neil just talked about Clemson. Well, a lot of what Spurrier did, for example, we didn't see him go up against Clemson when Clemson was really good. Because I think that record would have been a lot different because they quote unquote won that state championship game, as Spurrier used to like to dig at, and so I think a lot's changed. It is all relative. Are they one of the blue bloods that can get it done? No, not if the teams in the top of the league are doing it right. But if they're not, yeah, they can certainly be competitive. It's certainly a place that if you can win 8 games, 9 games occasionally, and never really get below 7 or 6 schedule right, you can have that job forever, and they love you, and some may gripe, but why can't you get there? Steve Spurrier couldn't do it. Lou Holtz couldn't do it. Only Paul Dietzel did it in a completely different era. There's a reason for that. So, I don't think that they're going to turn it around and do that. Look, they're getting killed in recruiting by Clemson and Georgia. That's tough. That's the real tough thing. But they can go get players. They just can't get beat by, Kentucky. And they've got to have a better recruiting class than those schools so that they can turn around. We're talking 3 years from now that they're really good. Look, Will had some really good players that went on to the NFL, but they weren't consistent there. And quite frankly, as good a defensive coach as Will has been in the past, those defenses in large degree underachieved with a few fleeting exceptions.
And to your point, too, I mean, look at what Mac Brown is starting to do at North Carolina. I mean, North Carolina is a football-rich state as well. You got to be able to go into there. So it's kind of, for South Carolina, it's unfortunate. They're kind of surrounded by, gosh, I mean, we can't buy a win anywhere in terms of recruiting with the names that we have around us.
I have no doubt about it. And I think people need to be patient. I know no one has that. No one wants to hear that. Everybody thinks, well, we hire the right guy, we can win and we can do this and that. I think the one thing that could change the landscape, if you can be pretty good, you can be pretty competitive down the road, then who knows? Maybe you might end up, getting a program that's a different level. I don't think you can win big there, but you don't have to. This is not Alabama, where, in fact, would you rather have the job at Auburn or South Carolina if you don't have ties to either place? You know what? You probably can survive at South Carolina with the winning the right 8 games a year. At Auburn, they're going to have greater expectations. Florida, Georgia, they all have greater expectations. Win or they're going to chop your head off. That's not really South Carolina. Eventually, you got to do something. You can't stink, but, if you're competitive and you do 2 things, recruit better and schedule better, easier, you can have some success. Hey, we want to remind you folks to search for, like, and subscribe to the Landry Football Podcast channel on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, wherever you get your podcasts, so you can listen to this show, SEC Football and Beyond. So make sure you do that today. Landry Football Podcast channel. Make sure that you sign up for that. Rate, review, join us here. Guys, again, we're going to get into the more teams coming up. We're going to have Auburn and Tennessee coming up on Monday. And no, we're just kind of picking one from the West and one from the East. So we're just kind of having a little fun with it. So any parting thoughts, guys?
Nope. Everybody have a great weekend. And,
there you go. That's a good parting thought.
We'll talk to you next week.
For Dan Matthews, for Neil McCready, for all of you great folks joining us in the chat room, appreciate it. Spread the word. We're doing the show live, 5 p.m. Central, Mondays and Thursday afternoons, and you can catch this podcast. Have it dropped. Again, sign up for Landry Football Podcast channel, wherever you get your podcast, and you'll have it dropped to your mobile device every Tuesday and Friday mornings. We'll see you. As Neil said, have a great weekend, everybody. Talk to you Monday.